The campfire had burned down to embers 3 times during the endless night, and each time Catherine Brennan fed it more precious wood, her hands trembled not from the cold October air of 1882 Montana Territory, but from the yellow eyes that watched her from the darkness beyond the flickering light. She had been traveling alone for 6 days since leaving Fort Benton, her wagon laden with supplies, and her father's old rifle across her knees, heading south to the small settlement of Silver Creek where her aunt supposedly ran a boarding house. Catherine had received the letter 3 months ago in Philadelphia after her father died from pneumonia and left her with nothing but debts and the gold locket around her neck that had belonged to her mother. At 22 years old, with auburn hair she kept pinned severely back and green eyes that had seen too much loss, Catherine had sold everything, bought a wagon and horse, and headed west with a determination that surprised even herself. She had expected hardship, had prepared for loneliness, had even steeled herself against the possibility of bandits or hostile encounters, but she had not prepared for wolves. The pack had appeared just after sunset, materializing from the pine forest like gray ghosts. At first she had seen only 2, then 4, then she lost count as they circled her small campsite in the clearing she had chosen beside a narrow creek. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Bess, had gone wild with fear, and it had taken Catherine nearly an hour to calm her enough to tie her securely to the wagon wheel. The wolves had not attacked, but neither had they left. They simply circled, patient and persistent, their eyes reflecting the firelight like dozens of small moons in the darkness. Catherine had fired the rifle twice into the air, the shots echoing through the mountains, but the wolves had barely flinched. They simply moved back a few yards, waited, then resumed their circular patrol. She checked her ammunition and realized with a sinking heart that she had only 8 bullets left. 8 bullets against a pack of perhaps 15 wolves. The mathematics of survival were not in her favor. As the night wore on, Catherine found herself talking to the wolves, her voice hoarse from fear and smoke. She told them about Philadelphia, about her father's bookshop, about the smell of leather and paper and pipe tobacco. She told them about her mother, who had died when Catherine was only 7, and how she barely remembered her face anymore, only the feeling of safety when her mother had held her. She told them about the letter from Aunt Margaret, written in shaky handwriting, promising a home and work and a fresh start in Montana Territory. The wolves listened with their ancient, patient eyes, and Catherine wondered if this was how she would die, alone in the wilderness, her bones picked clean before anyone even knew she was missing. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, turning from black to deep purple, when Catherine heard the sound of hoofbeats. At first she thought exhaustion was making her imagine things, but then the sound grew louder, more distinct. The wolves heard it too, their ears pricking forward, their attention shifting from her to the approaching rider. He came through the trees like something out of a dream, or perhaps a dime novel, though Catherine's exhausted mind could barely process what she was seeing. A man on a tall roan horse wearing a long coat that flapped behind him and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He was riding fast, and in his hand was a coiled rope. As he burst into the clearing, he let out a yell that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, wild and fierce, and he began swinging the rope over his head in wide circles. The wolves scattered, but not in panic. They moved with the same liquid grace they had maintained all night, simply melting back into the trees. The man rode around the perimeter of Catherine's campsite twice more, yelling and swinging the rope, and then he slowed his horse to a walk and finally stopped a few yards from her fire. Catherine stood on trembling legs, the rifle still clutched in her hands, though she was not quite pointing it at him. The man dismounted in one smooth motion and pushed his hat back, and she got her first clear look at his face in the growing dawn light. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, a strong jaw shadowed with several days of beard growth, and eyes that were an unusual shade of amber brown. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, white against his tanned skin, and his mouth was set in a grim line. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent years in the territories. Catherine tried to answer, but her throat was too dry. She nodded instead, then to her absolute mortification, felt her knees begin to buckle. The man moved faster than she would have thought possible, covering the distance between them in 3 long strides and catching her before she fell. His hands were strong and sure on her arms, steadying her, and she could smell wood smoke and horse and leather. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentler. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Catherine managed to whisper. "I was too frightened to eat last night." The man guided her to sit on one of the logs near her fire and then set about building it back up with the efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Catherine watched him through eyes that felt full of sand, noticing the way he moved with purpose and confidence, the way his hands were weathered but careful as he arranged the kindling. "I am Catherine Brennan," she said finally, remembering her manners despite everything. "From Philadelphia. I am traveling to Silver Creek." The man looked up from the fire, and something flickered across his face. "Silver Creek? That is where I live." "Well, near there anyway. I have a ranch about 5 miles south of town." He stood and extended his hand. "Jack Cordell." Catherine shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Cordell. I truly thought I would not see the morning." "Those wolves would not have attacked you," Jack said, settling onto a log across from her. "Not with the fire going. But they might have gone after your horse, and then you would have been in real trouble out here alone." He paused, his amber eyes studying her face. "What is a lady from Philadelphia doing traveling alone through Montana territory?" Catherine bristled slightly at the judgment in his tone, though she knew he had earned the right to ask questions. "I am going to live with my aunt, Margaret Brennan. She runs a boarding house in Silver Creek. My father died, and there was nothing left for me in Philadelphia." Jack's expression softened. "I am sorry about your father. And yes, I know Margaret. She is a good woman, though she has had some health troubles lately. Rheumatism in her hands." He glanced at Catherine's wagon, taking in the worn canvas cover and the supplies visible inside. "You have been traveling alone the whole way from Fort Benton?" "Yes," Catherine said, lifting her chin slightly. "I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." One corner of Jack's mouth quirked up in something that might have been a smile. "I can see that. Though capable or not, this country does not care. It will kill you just the same if you are not careful." He stood and walked to his horse, retrieving a canteen and a cloth-wrapped package from his saddlebag. "Here, water and some dried beef and biscuits. You need to eat something before we ride." "We?" Catherine took the canteen gratefully and drank deeply before accepting the food. "I cannot leave you out here alone, Miss Brennan. Silver Creek is still a good day's ride south, and there is weather coming in. I can see it in the clouds." Jack nodded toward the western sky, where Catherine could now make out dark clouds building on the horizon. "Besides, your aunt would have my hide if I let anything happen to you." Catherine wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she did not need an escort, but the memory of the wolves' eyes in the darkness was too fresh, and the trembling in her hands had not quite stopped. "Thank you," she said instead. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Cordell." "Jack," he said, "out here, we do not stand much on formality." "Then you must call me Catherine." They broke camp together as the sun finally crested the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Jack moved around the campsite with practiced efficiency, helping Catherine load her supplies back into the wagon, checking the wheels and the harness, calming Bess with soft words and gentle hands. Catherine found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way his shoulders filled out his worn flannel shirt, the way he handled everything with a combination of strength and care. They set out as the morning light strengthened, Jack riding alongside the wagon on his roan horse. The trail wound through pine forests and across open meadows where the grass had turned golden with autumn. Catherine had thought she might feel awkward traveling with a strange man, but Jack had a way of filling the silence that did not feel intrusive. He pointed out landmarks, told her about the territory, warned her about which water sources were safe to drink from and which were not. "How long have you been in Montana?" Catherine asked as they stopped to rest the horses beside a small stream around midday. 8 years, Jack said, loosening his horse's cinch. "I came out here after the war. Could not settle back into normal life in Missouri, so I headed west like a lot of other men." He glanced at her. "Built my ranch from nothing. It is not much, but it is mine." "What do you raise?" "Cattle mostly, some horses. It is hard work, especially alone, but I like it." There was something in his voice that made Catherine think he was not entirely alone by choice, and she found herself curious about his story. "Do you go into Silver Creek often?" "Once or twice a month for supplies. It is a small town, maybe 200 people, but it has what you need. A general store, a church, a saloon, a doctor." Jack looked at her seriously. "It is not Philadelphia, Catherine. Life is hard out here, and it is lonely sometimes. Are you sure this is what you want?" Catherine met his gaze steadily. "I do not have anywhere else to go, and honestly, Philadelphia had nothing for me anymore. At least here I have a chance to build something new." Jack nodded slowly. "That is a good way to look at it. Montana has a way of giving people second chances, if they are willing to work for it." They rode on through the afternoon, and Catherine found herself relaxing despite the long hours in the wagon. Jack told her about the other ranchers in the area, about the harsh winters and the beautiful summers, about the times he had seen grizzly bears and mountain lions, and once a herd of elk so large it had taken nearly an hour to pass his ranch. She told him about her father's bookshop, about the books she had loved reading as a child, about her dreams of becoming a teacher someday. "Silver Creek needs a teacher," Jack said. "The last one left about 6 months ago to get married. The children have been making do with lessons from whoever has time, but it is not the same." Catherine felt a small spark of hope in her chest. "Do you really think they would hire me?" "I do not see why not. You are educated, and you seem patient enough." Jack's amber eyes held a warmth that made Catherine's cheeks flush slightly. "I think you will do well here, Catherine Brennan." The weather Jack had predicted came in late afternoon. Dark clouds rolling over the mountains with alarming speed. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, and the first drops of rain began to fall just as they crested a ridge and looked down into a valley. "My ranch," Jack said, pointing to a cluster of buildings about a mile away. "We need to get there before this storm really hits. Can you handle the wagon at speed?" "Yes," Catherine said, though her heart was pounding. She had never driven fast through rough terrain before, but the alternative was being caught in the open during what looked like it might become a serious storm. They made it to the ranch just as the rain began falling in earnest, heavy drops that quickly turned into a downpour. Jack jumped down from his horse and ran to help Catherine from the wagon, his hand strong and warm as he helped her down. Together they ran for the main house, a solid log structure with a covered porch, and Jack threw open the door. The inside was simple but well kept, with a stone fireplace on one wall, a wooden table and chairs, a small kitchen area, and a loft visible above. Everything was neat and organized in a way that suggested Jack took pride in his home despite living alone. He immediately set about lighting a fire in the fireplace while Catherine stood dripping on the wooden floor, suddenly very aware that she was alone in a man's house, unchaperoned, with night falling and a storm raging outside. Jack must have sensed her discomfort because he straightened from the fireplace and said, "I will take care of the horses and then sleep in the barn tonight. You can have the house. There are dry clothes in the trunk at the foot of the bed if you want to change, and food in the larder. Make yourself at home." "I cannot put you out of your own house," Catherine protested. "You're not putting me out. I have slept in the barn plenty of times. It is warm and dry." Jack was already heading for the door. "I will be back in a bit to check on the fire, and then I will leave you be. We can head into Silver Creek first thing in the morning." He was gone before Catherine could argue further, disappearing into the storm. She stood alone in the warm room, listening to the rain drum on the roof, and felt a confusing mixture of gratitude and disappointment. Jack Cordell was a good man. She could see that clearly, but there was something else too, something that made her heart beat a little faster when he looked at her with those amber eyes, something that made her want to know more about him. Catherine changed into dry clothes, finding a man's shirt and pants in the trunk that she had to roll up several times to fit. She braided her wet hair and then explored the small house, noting the books on a shelf near the fireplace, a Bible, and several agricultural guides, and, surprisingly, a worn copy of Charles Dickens. There was a photograph on the mantel, faded and water-stained, showing a young couple and a small boy. Catherine studied it, wondering if these were Jack's parents, if the boy was Jack himself. When Jack returned an hour later, knocking before entering, Catherine had made coffee and was warming some beans and salt pork she had found in the larder. He stopped in the doorway, water dripping from his hat, and stared at her. "You did not have to do that," he said. "You saved my life and opened your home to me. The least I can do is make you a hot meal before you go sleep in a barn." Catherine poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "Besides, I was hungry, and it seemed foolish to cook just for myself." Jack hung his coat and hat on a peg by the door and moved to warm his hands by the fire. "You are a peculiar woman, Catherine Brennan." "Is that a compliment or an insult?" "Neither. Just an observation." Jack accepted the coffee she offered and took a long drink. Most ladies from back east would be having vapors about now, demanding to be taken to town immediately, storm or no storm. "I am not most ladies," Catherine said quietly. "Life has taught me to be practical." They ate together at the small table, and the conversation flowed more easily than Catherine would have expected. Jack asked about her journey west, and she told him about the train rides and the riverboat and the final leg by wagon from Fort Benton. She asked about his ranch, and he told her about the challenges of building a herd, of keeping cattle alive through brutal winters, of fighting off rustlers and predators. "Why did you stay?" Catherine asked. "If it is so hard, why not go somewhere easier?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "Because this is mine," he said finally. "Every board in this house, every fence post on this land, I put it there with my own hands. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody can take it away. After the war, after seeing so much death and destruction, I needed something to build, something to care for. This ranch gave me that." Catherine understood that in a way she had not expected to. "That is why I came west too, I think. Not just because I had nowhere else to go, but because I wanted something that was mine, something I could build." Their eyes met across the table, and Catherine felt that strange flutter in her chest again. Jack looked away first, standing abruptly to take his plate to the small sink. "I should go. You need rest after the night you had." "Jack," Catherine said, also standing, "thank you, not just for saving me from the wolves, but for this, for treating me like a person instead of a burden." "You are not a burden, Catherine." Jack's voice was low, and when he looked at her again, there was something in his amber eyes that made her breath catch. "You are one of the bravest women I have ever met." He left then, disappearing back into the storm, and Catherine stood in the warm house feeling more confused than ever. She barely knew this man, had met him only that morning, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to being rescued, but as she climbed into Jack's bed later that night, surrounded by the scent of him on the pillows, she knew it was more than that. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. Catherine woke early and dressed in her own clothes, now dry from hanging by the fire all night. She found Jack already up, working on her wagon wheel, which had apparently developed a crack the day before. He had his shirt sleeves rolled up, and she could see the muscles in his forearms as he worked. "Good morning," she called, and he looked up with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Morning. I will have this fixed in about an hour, and then we can head to town. Your aunt will be wondering where you are." But as it turned out, they did not make it to town that day. Just as Jack was finishing the repair, one of his neighbors came riding up in a panic. His wife was in labor, having trouble, and they needed help. The nearest doctor was in Silver Creek, too far to reach in time. I will go, Catherine said immediately before she could think about it. You know about birthing babies? Jack asked, surprise clear in his voice. My father was a doctor before he opened the bookshop. He taught me some things, and I helped deliver 3 babies in Philadelphia. Catherine was already climbing onto the neighbor's horse behind him. Tell me what the situation is. Jack followed on his own horse, and together they rode to the neighbor's small cabin. What followed was the longest afternoon of Catherine's life, helping a woman she had never met bring her 4th child into the world. Jack stayed nearby, heating water, bringing clean cloths, his presence calm and steadying. When the baby finally came, a healthy girl with a lusty cry, Catherine felt tears streaming down her own face. The mother, whose name was Hannah, gripped Catherine's hand with surprising strength. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. It was evening by the time Catherine and Jack rode back to his ranch. They were both exhausted, covered in sweat and other things, but there was a satisfaction in it too. As they unsaddled the horses, working side by side in the barn, Catherine felt Jack watching her. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. You are remarkable, Jack said simply. You have been in Montana territory less than a week, survived a wolf pack, traveled alone across dangerous country, and today you saved a woman's life and delivered her baby. You are not like anyone I have ever met, Catherine Brennan. Catherine felt her cheeks grow warm. I only did what needed to be done. That is what makes you remarkable. Jack stepped closer, and suddenly the air between them felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. Catherine, I know we just met, and I know I have no right to say this, but I want you to know that if you ever need anything at all, I will be here. I will help you. I will protect you. I will do whatever you need. Why? Catherine whispered, though she thought she might already know the answer. Because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since I saw you standing by that campfire, exhausted and terrified but still so brave, talking to those wolves like they were old friends. Jack reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Because something happened to me when I met you, something I cannot quite explain. Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. I feel it too, she admitted. I thought I was just grateful, but it is more than that. I feel like I have known you much longer than one day. Jack cupped her face in both hands, his touch gentle despite his calloused palms. May I kiss you, Catherine? She nodded, unable to speak, and then his lips were on hers, warm and firm and perfect. Catherine had been kissed before, chaste pecks from suitable young men in Philadelphia, but nothing had prepared her for this. Jack kissed her like she was precious, like she was everything, and when he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. We should probably get you to your aunt's, Jack said, his voice rough. Probably, Catherine agreed, but neither of them moved. They stood in the barn as the last light faded, holding each other, and Catherine felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like coming home. They finally made it to Silver Creek the next morning, riding together with Catherine's wagon trailing behind. The town was small, just a main street with buildings on either side, but it looked welcoming in the morning sun. Jack led her to a neat white house with a sign that read Brennan Boarding House. And before Catherine could even climb down from the wagon, the front door flew open and a woman came hurrying out. Aunt Margaret was smaller than Catherine had expected, with gray hair and sharp blue eyes, but her hug was fierce and warm. Catherine, oh, my dear girl, I have been so worried. I expected you 3 days ago. I am sorry, Aunt Margaret. I had some trouble on the road, but Mr. Cordell here rescued me and made sure I arrived safely. Catherine made the introductions, trying not to blush when Jack's eyes met hers. Jack Cordell, you are a good man, Margaret said, patting his arm. Come inside, both of you. I will make coffee and you can tell me everything. Over coffee and fresh bread, Catherine told her aunt about the journey, about the wolves, about Jack's timely arrival. She carefully did not mention the kiss in the barn, though she caught Jack smiling at her several times in a way that made her stomach flutter. Margaret listened with wide eyes, occasionally gasping or exclaiming. "Well, you are here now and safe, and that is what matters," Margaret said finally. "And Catherine, I must tell you, I have a proposition for you. The town has been looking for a teacher. And when I got your letter saying you were coming, I may have mentioned that you were educated and interested in teaching. The town council would like to meet with you." Catherine looked at Jack, who was grinning. "I told you," he said. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Catherine met with the town council and was offered the teaching position starting immediately. The schoolhouse was small, just one room with a wood stove and rough wooden benches, but Catherine loved it instantly. She had 14 students ranging from age 6 to 15, and though some were behind in their studies, they were eager to learn. Jack came to town every few days, always finding a reason to stop by the school or the boarding house. He brought Catherine books for the students, helped repair the school's broken windows, and once brought an entire deer he had shot to help stock Margaret's larder for winter. Catherine found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. They took walks together when the weather permitted, strolling through the town and along the creek that gave Silver Creek its name. Jack told her about his childhood in Missouri, about fighting in the war when he was barely 18, about the slow process of healing and building his ranch. Catherine told him about losing her mother young, about helping in her father's bookshop, about the dreams she had thought she would never be able to pursue. "What did you dream about?" Jack asked one crisp November afternoon as they sat on a fallen log overlooking the valley. "This," Catherine said, gesturing to the mountains and the sky. "Freedom, I suppose. Space to breathe and think. The chance to do something meaningful with my life instead of just existing." She looked at him. "What about you? What do you dream about?" Jack was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I used to dream about just surviving, just making it through another day, but lately I've been dreaming about something different." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I have been dreaming about a family, about coming home to someone who cares if I made it back safely, about building something that lasts beyond just me." Catherine's breath caught. "Jack?" He turned to face her fully, his amber eyes serious. "I know we have only known each other a few weeks. I know it is too soon, and I know I should wait longer. But Catherine, I am not a patient man, and life out here is too uncertain to waste time. I love you. I think I have loved you since I saw you sitting by that campfire, brave and determined even with those wolves all around you. I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to build a life with you." Tears sprang to Catherine's eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was afraid it was too soon, that I was foolish for feeling this way so quickly, but I do. I love you, Jack Cordell." He kissed her then, sweet and deep, and Catherine felt like she was flying. When they finally pulled apart, Jack was smiling wider than she had ever seen. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "Yes," Catherine laughed. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in December in the small church in Silver Creek with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Catherine wore a simple cream-colored dress that Margaret helped her make, and Jack wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers. The winter was hard, as Jack had warned it would be. Catherine moved to the ranch, though she continued teaching in town, riding in each morning and back each evening. Jack worried about her making the journey in the snow, but Catherine was stubborn and capable, and she loved both her teaching and her husband too much to give up either. They learned each other through that long winter, learning how to share space and make decisions together, learning each other's habits and preferences and moods. There were disagreements, of course, times when Catherine's stubborn independence clashed with Jack's protective instincts, but they always talked through it, always found a way to compromise. The nights were Catherine's favorite time. They would sit by the fire after dinner, Jack often mending tack or working on some project while Catherine graded papers or read aloud from one of their books. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories and dreams. And sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content to be near each other. And then there were the nights when Jack would pull her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that still made her heart race, carrying her to their bed where they would love each other with a tenderness and intensity that left them both breathless. Catherine had been nervous on their wedding night, unsure of what to expect, but Jack had been patient and gentle, and soon she discovered a joy and pleasure she had never imagined possible. Spring came slowly to Montana, the snow melting gradually to reveal the greening grass beneath. Catherine discovered she was pregnant in April, and Jack's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, and then set her down gently as if she might break. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Catherine, we are going to have a baby." She continued teaching through the spring and into the early summer, finally stopping when she was 6 months along and could no longer comfortably ride the distance to town. The students gave her a gift before she left, a quilt they had made with their mother's help, each square decorated with something different. Catherine cried as she thanked them, promising to return after the baby was born. Their son was born in September of 1883, almost exactly a year after Catherine had arrived in Montana Territory. The labor was long and hard, attended by Margaret and Hannah, the neighbor woman whose baby Catherine had helped deliver. Jack paced outside, unable to sit still, until finally Margaret opened the door and said, "Come meet your son." Jack had tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time, the tiny baby looking impossibly small in his work-roughened hands. "He is perfect," Jack whispered, looking at Catherine with such love it took her breath away. "You are perfect. Thank you." They named him Samuel after Catherine's father, and he had Jack's dark hair and Catherine's green eyes. Jack was a wonderful father, patient and playful, and Catherine loved watching them together. As Samuel grew, Jack would carry him around the ranch, pointing out animals and plants, telling him stories. Catherine would often find them in the barn, Samuel sitting on a hay bale while Jack worked, chattering away in his developing language while his father listened seriously and responded as if Samuel's toddler observations were the most profound things he had ever heard. Catherine returned to teaching when Samuel was 6 months old, bringing him with her. The students adored having a baby in the classroom, and the older girls competed to help watch him during lessons. It was chaotic sometimes, but it worked, and Catherine felt fulfilled in a way she had never imagined possible. The years passed quickly, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when they prayed for rain, seasons when money was tight and they had to carefully count every penny. But there were also good times, abundant harvests, and healthy calves, and moments of such perfect happiness that Catherine would stop whatever she was doing just to marvel at the life she had built. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Margaret after Catherine's aunt, born in 1885, and another son, Thomas, born in 1887. The ranch house grew to accommodate the growing family, Jack adding on rooms with help from neighbors. It was a good life, a full life, and Catherine never regretted her decision to come west. Margaret, the aunt, lived to see all 3 of her great nieces and nephews before passing peacefully in her sleep in 1889. Catherine grieved deeply for the woman who had given her a home and a chance at a new life, but she also felt grateful for the years they had had together. They buried Margaret in the Silver Creek Cemetery under a big cottonwood tree, and Catherine made sure to visit often with the children. As the century turned toward its end, Silver Creek grew from a small settlement into a proper town. More families arrived, drawn by tales of good land and opportunity. The school expanded, and Catherine eventually trained 2 other teachers to help with the growing number of students. Jack's ranch prospered, and they were able to hire help during the busy seasons. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack took Catherine back to the place where they had first met, the clearing where she had spent that terrifying night surrounded by wolves. It had taken some arranging, leaving the children with neighbors and taking 2 days away from the ranch, but Jack had insisted. They arrived at sunset and made camp. And as Catherine watched Jack build the fire, she was struck by how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. They were older now, both of them marked by years of hard work and Montana weather. Jack had more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. Catherine knew she had changed too, her hands rougher, her face more tanned, her body shaped by bearing and nursing 3 children. But the way Jack looked at her had not changed. When he turned from the fire and saw her watching him, his amber eyes still held that same warmth, that same love that had been there from the beginning. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to sit beside her. "About that night," Catherine said. "About how terrified I was, how certain I was going to die out here. I never could have imagined that less than a year later I would be married to the man who saved me, that we would have a beautiful son, that I would be happier than I had ever thought possible." Jack put his arm around her and pulled her close. "I think about that night too. I remember seeing you by that fire, so brave and so alone, and feeling like I'd been hit by lightning. I had built a good life for myself out here, or so I thought, but suddenly I realized how empty it was. You changed everything, Catherine." "The wolves changed everything," Catherine said with a laugh. "If they had not been circling my campfire, we might never have met." "Then I owe those wolves a debt of gratitude," Jack said, kissing her temple, "though I am glad they did not actually hurt you." They sat together as the stars came out, talking about the past and the future, about their children and their dreams for them, about the ranch and the school, and all the little details of the life they had built together. And when they finally lay down to sleep, wrapped in blankets under the vast Montana sky, Catherine felt a peace and contentment that she knew was rare and precious. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, taking naturally to ranch work. Margaret proved to be brilliant at mathematics and reading, often helping Catherine teach the younger students. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with a sweetness that made it impossible to stay angry with him for long. Jack and Catherine grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They still took walks together when they could, still sat by the fire on winter evenings, still found time to hold each other and remember why they had fallen in love. There were hard times too, seasons of drought or illness or worry. But they faced everything together, their partnership strong and steady. In 1895, when Catherine was 35 and Jack 40, they had one more child, a surprise daughter they named Grace. The older children adored their baby sister, and Jack joked that he was getting too old to be getting up for midnight feedings. But Catherine saw the way he looked at Grace with the same wonder he had shown with Samuel, and she knew he was just as happy as she was. The new century came, bringing with it changes they could never have imagined. Automobiles began appearing on the roads, electricity came to Silver Creek, and the world seemed to be moving faster than ever. But on the ranch, life continued much as it always had. Cattle still needed tending, crops still needed planting, children still needed raising. The fundamentals had not changed. Samuel eventually took over most of the daily operations of the ranch, allowing Jack to slow down a bit. Margaret became a teacher herself, taking over the Silver Creek School when Catherine finally retired in 1905. Thomas left for a few years to see more of the world, but he came back, bringing with him a bride and a renewed appreciation for Montana. Grace grew up watching her older siblings and parents, soaking in lessons about love and hard work and commitment. On a warm evening in the summer of 1910, Jack and Catherine sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. They were in their 60s now, grandparents several times over, their hair gray and their bodies marked by years of hard work. But their hands were still intertwined, fingers laced together as they had been for nearly 30 years. "Did you ever imagine this?" Catherine asked, gesturing to the bustling ranch around them, to the house full of children and grandchildren. "That night when the wolves were circling, did you imagine any of this?" Jack squeezed her hand. "No," he admitted. "I imagined saving you, maybe seeing you safely to town, but this? A life together? A family, decades of love and partnership. This was beyond anything I could have dreamed. He turned to look at her, his amber eyes still as warm as ever. You made all my dreams come true, Catherine Cordell. And you made mine, Catherine said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I came west looking for a home, and I found so much more. I found love. I found purpose. I found you. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had built a life from nothing but love and determination and a chance meeting on a dark Montana night. Around them, their family gathered for dinner. Grandchildren laughing and playing, their children's voices mixing with the sounds of the ranch settling in for evening. Catherine thought about the young woman she had been, sitting alone by that campfire, terrified and exhausted, but determined to survive. She thought about Jack riding out of the dawn like a hero from a story, scattering the wolves and changing her life forever. She thought about all the moments since then, the big ones and the small ones that had woven together to create this beautiful life. Thank you, she whispered to Jack. For what? For finding me that morning, for seeing something in me worth saving, worth loving. Jack brought their joined hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Thank you for letting me love you, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything. As the night deepened and their family called them inside for dinner, Jack and Catherine Cordell rose together, walking hand in hand into the warm, lamp-lit house full of the people they loved most in the world. The wolves that had once circled in the darkness were long gone, but the love that had begun that dawn morning had only grown stronger with time, a testament to the power of courage, kindness, and two hearts that had found each other against all odds in the vast Montana wilderness.